Boss fights are one of the most important parts of video games, as they're a way to test the player's skill and show them how far they've come. But not all of them are, well, good. Top 5 worst boss fights! Genuinely, there is not a single fight in here I like. The most redeemable ones are over quickly. And if a numbered entry has spoilers for a specific game, I will try to keep them as vague as possible unless it is required context, and also give you a spoiler warning for what specific game it is on the number screen. So, without further ado, let's hop right into the list. Number 5. God, I can't believe I just did that. At number 5 is the Dragon Skeleton from Tales of Zesteria. And this is a boss that is only down this low on this list because it is entirely optional and there is almost no reason to fight him. I didn't even get an achievement. But the core issue with this guy is he just does not die. Like, his health bar just never felt like it was depleting. Like, you could straight up look away for like 10, 15 minutes and his health bar barely changed even if you were wailing at him that entire time with a full party. Hell, the original spot for this and from this game was this game's final boss. This thing, which I give less critique to because it is optional, still beat out the final boss, which is incredibly unfun and just slowly strips away mechanics. Oh yeah, I also maybe forgot to mention that he has a status effect that he can inflict. That is every status effect in the game at once. And to make things worse, said status effect cannot be gotten rid of by status effect removing abilities or items. If you get it, might as well die. And to top it all off, it is at the end of an incredible side quest that, frankly, I think I'd put above the game's own DLC campaign. For clarification, it's the post-game Hexen Isle side quest, in which is how you access both cameo fights that are in this game. Instead of topping it off with a really cool fight against returning characters, it's this random dragon that has nothing to do with anything, and is just here. And if you're going to be like, oh, maybe it has something to do with the games the cameo characters from, I've played both of those games. There is nothing like this. Which sucks, because I think you even could have made a cool boss being a cameo character using this game's main mechanic of armatization. Imagine having to fight the cameo characters while using a power-up exclusive to this game's world. That's more theory crafting than actually critiquing the boss, so let's get back to complaining. It's frustrating just because it's a boss that hinders what is an incredible side quest. Because you can't remove its status, it refuses to die. Oh, also I should add, aside from the painful status, the boss isn't even that difficult. Like, yeah, the AI will probably die, but genuinely, as long as you just stick by its tail, it can't really attack you. So, it's hard to call it an interesting or fun fight. Like, yeah, it's super weak to default attacks, but the problem is, your DPS is through armatization, which makes all of your attacks a different element. And all of these are without acknowledging the fact items exist, which can make this even easier. Because, oh, well, what if a party member dies? It's super easy to revive them in this game, just because of its systems. And don't get me wrong, I really like those systems, because it effectively means no matter what, there is very little downtime where you are not doing something. The only problem is, due to those exact systems, it makes a boss where it's basically just supposed to occasionally hit like a truck not difficult in the slightest. The only reason I ended up bothering to finish this fight is because after I played through the DLC campaign, I got an additional 20 levels on my main game file for some reason, and I'm like, screw it, I'll just do it. And I'm gonna be honest, I just watched YouTube. That's gonna be a recurring theme throughout this video. Believe me. Anyway, on to number 4. And, yeah, this one's a boss that exists. It's the Beta Chaos from Dark Souls. And instead of running down my issues, I'm just gonna give you a play-by-play. Because the boss starts with a really cool slide down, where you have to dodge obstacles. Gives me vibes of Sonic. Which isn't bad until you realize it's like 30 seconds long, and every time you die, you're going to have to do this. Then you hit it. And it doesn't take any damage to its health bar. What? I'm sorry, I think bosses are supposed to take damage now. A cutscene plays, which implies you're on the right track, and then some of the floor disappears. And now the boss is swinging at you, trying to knock you into the pit. Rinse and repeat this 3 times, where you then have to walk through a long, dark hallway with absolutely no hazards and hit the enemy once. It's not fun, and it's an incredibly late game boss. Well, Dark Souls isn't super linear. This was effectively the penultimate boss I did before the final one. And let me say this, it's harder getting to the fight than it is actually beating the enemy. And if that doesn't convince you on how bad this is, it is the only fight in the entire game to have a checkpoint system. Yeah, I don't even think the developers thought this fight was fun. And this isn't like, oh, I don't like difficult fights. I've played Dark Souls 1 and Elden Ring and really liked them and intend to play through most of the rest of the Soulsborne franchise. And as I said, it's harder getting to the fight than the fight itself. The checkpoints make the fight uninteresting, and I genuinely do believe that this fight adds nothing to the game. It doesn't really take much away from the game. Sure as hell doesn't add anything. And I get they wanted Dark Souls Remastered to be a faithful recreation / enhanced version of the original game. But could you have changed this specific boss? One, so bad that it consistently makes the worst bosses lists that basically anyone has made. And it would be a lot higher. It's probably the highest out of a lot of the more popular games that a lot of people have played that I have. Considering some of the other games on this list are definitely less popular than Dark Souls. Like, the fact is, when I played Dark Souls for the first time, the friend who got me into this series basically went, by the way, there's one boss that really sucks. Don't worry, it has checkpoints. And again, I mentioned this at the very beginning, the slide does not work for a Souls-like game. Because it is a series about trial and error. And that little slide adds about 30 seconds to every attempt. And if this was not a boss that you could, as long as you even just hit it once every attempt, beat it 4 times, you'd be done. Its only saving grace is that it's over quick. Hey, if you're enjoying, please consider liking and subscribing since it helps with the channel an absolute ton. Thanks. As for number 3, it's a grind of a fight in a game filled with grinding. Yeah, it's not that favorable a comparison. And if you know what game is on screen, you could tell what boss I'm about to talk about. Zora Magdaros. It is a boss that supposedly took years of development because they could not make it fun. They still didn't. They really should have just scrapped this fight altogether. The fight is split into 2-ish phases. More accurately, 2 against Zora Magdaros, 1 against a different monster. And for the sake of this, to be as favorable as I can to this thing, I'm only talking about the phases where we fight the monster this section is for. And to be entirely blunt, I wasn't even sure if I should include Monster Hunter bosses on this list, because effectively everything in that game is a boss. But Zora Magdaros is one of those that's treated with a bunch of extra flair. So I'd count it along with the actual, like, Elder Dragons. So, the first phase is shoot it repeatedly with a bow and arrow. You know, a mechanic that has basically never been used in this game up to this point, if ever, and is completely different to the game you actually signed up for. Phase 1 itself is a slog, and feels as long as a normal hunt in this game goes on. And then you get to Phase 2, where you're plopped on top of this thing's back and have to search around for crystals to destroy. Once you destroy all of them, you'll enter Phase 3. That doesn't sound too bad, if you ignore the fact that there's almost nothing that can hurt you, and it's basically just a fetch quest of blindly looking around until you find a crystal. Then doing that 5 more times. Sorry, did I say nothing could hurt you? I specifically meant it depends on what class you chose to play, because some classes can be hurt, and others can't. And there's one other thing I forgot to mention. This stupid monster's crystals have so much health. Genuinely, I think we'd have better odds just shooting it with an arrow repeatedly than trying to take it out like this. And then after that slog of a fight, which, by the way, is on a timer, there's still another fight, which I'm not including because it isn't actually that bad. It's a more standard fight, just on this thing's back. And also, I said I wasn't going to include because it is a different monster, but there's still more. So if you lose to that monster, hope you're ready to do it all again. Next up on our list, the penultimate fight. The Marie fight in Persona 4 Golden. And I just need to say this. This fight would be number 1 if it weren't technically optional. And when I say technically optional, I mean it as in, this fight is part of the main story, but if you don't socialize with Marie, you don't do it. But if you do, there's no backing out. Now, the first thing to note is all of your items are taken away from you at the start of this dungeon. So, I really do hope you like praying that you have good items somewhere in this dungeon that work for your characters and your playstyle. Because if there aren't, good luck. And from the footage on screen right now, you may be wondering why. It looks like a relatively standard fight. And also, if you're here and haven't fought this boss, what are you doing? I literally said this was late game spoilers, and it really is. You should know that the first phase is barely even a part of this fight. Genuinely, if this first phase did not exist, this fight would still be on the list. Its position would not change. This fight is just there. Also, no, I'm not accounting the dungeon outside of the area. I solely mentioned it because you do not have your items, which does affect the fight. Anyway, on to Phase 2, Kasumi no Okami. Am I pronouncing that correct? I don't know. And frankly, I don't care. This fight is misery. Because I'm just gonna put it like this. It is immune to every single type of attack in the game. So your only ways to attack it are with Almighty or break skills. And if you're like me, you probably abandoned the break skills because they're never useful in any of these games aside from this one fight. And at that, if you're running physical attackers like Chie or Kanji, you still can't attack. And for the sake of this, I'll just quickly run down my party. You, who is wielding 2 personas, one focused on support and the other being Loki, a great ice damage attacker. Chie, my physical and ice attacker. Yukiko, my healer who can also use fire, and Naoto, who was really a jack of all trades, somehow more than the character who can use any persona. So my only form of attacking this thing was through Naoto's almighty attacks. Chie couldn't do anything, neither could you, and Yukiko could heal, sure, but that was about it. Thankfully, I picked up an item in the dungeon that restored about 5 SP a turn, which meant I was guaranteed to not lose as long as I didn't die. And you may be wondering why I'm saying I can attack it now despite all of its immunities. Almighty bypasses all of it. And the only almighty attack I had on my entire party was on Naoto. This entire fight relied on Naoto's ability to attack once a turn if they had the SP. And you may be like, oh, well, there are items that inflict break. Yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't know that till the literal final turn of the boss fight. So Chie was just on tossing items. You occasionally healed or to keep himself alive since Loki reflects ice / absorbs ice. Yukiko was on healing and Naoto was on please for the love of God kill it. And I'm gonna be honest, I definitely just watched YouTube that whole time. Yeah, I told you that would become a running theme. Because does anyone want to wager how long this one singular fight took me? Because the answer is over 3 hours. Did I beat the boss on my first try? Yes. Was the boss relatively easy? Yes. Was it an absolute slog? Absolutely. The only reason this isn't number 1 is because it is technically optional, and I do like the story context added in by this boss fight. So, shall we move on to the absolute worst boss, and the one that inspired this whole video? So, let's move on to the absolute worst boss I've ever had the dishonor of facing. It's Zed. I'm not even gonna hide it. It's Zed. I can list several reasons, and in fact, I will. Also, this boss has more than 8 phases. Issue number 1. It restricts all of your core gameplay mechanics. For clarification, you want to use chain attacks to deal damage, which was my main damage dealer in my playthrough? Too bad, you can't use them. You want to use your Ouroboros forms for literally anything? Too bad, you can't. Like, I will give the game this. It is a really cool looking fight. Thematically, I like it. What they do, I like it. If this were the shonen anime that Xenoblade is clearly trying to be sometimes, this would be an incredible fight. But this is a video game, and I actually have to deal with these consequences. Also, if you're wondering why I'm pronouncing it Zed, not Z, I don't feel like getting into this argument, and these games use British English, so it's still just Zed there. Also, Zed sounds more intimidating for a final boss than something that sounds like you just changed the first symbol of Wii! Also, this isn't a part of my critique with this fight, but this fight very much seems to think you did all of the hero quests, especially by the end. It's like, you don't have to. They're just side content. Like, I did so and it wasn't a big issue or break pacing, but when you learn, by the way, all this stuff will happen regardless, including a party member who dies coming back from the dead, even if you didn't do their side quest, seems a bit ridiculous. Like, I'm just gonna be honest. The fight isn't that interesting, and yes, you'll occasionally see a chain attack, which are entirely scripted. So once you're done with that boring first phase, where you have to go through 3 entirely scripted chain attacks, where you basically just do nothing for a couple minutes in between, you enter phase 2, or I think it's phase 4, I don't know, this boss has too many. Anyway, we're now talking about the actual final boss, and the actual number 1 entry, Zed Infinite. God, this fight sucks. If you thought the limiting mechanics thing was bad, well, you have them back this time around. Hope you don't get used to them for too long. Because he will then split your party up into the Kevis and Agnes halves, which make it so your party is reduced from 7 to 3, and 1 on one side depending on which hero you have. Well, he consistently just keeps getting new health bars. And I'm gonna be honest, again, cinematically this fight is really cool, because after a certain point, all the heroes who you can use to help you on your adventure will join in and help you in the final battle. Eventually culminating in the 2 queens, the 2 female leads from prior Xenoblade games joining in the fray. And I think that's awesome. Cinematically, from a story perspective, from a visual perspective, it's a really cool fight. But to play through it, it isn't. Like, one of my friends just went on their phone during this fight. Apparently, I wasn't there, but... And for me, I could have just put down the controller and left the room. Because by the end of the game, my party was entirely immortal. Because of how this game works, if someone died, everyone else just got healed back to full. And anyone could revive anyone at no cost. The fight is just slow and uninteresting. Which sucks, because again, it has some really cool ideas, and some things I really like. And I do think splitting up the party is a cool idea. Especially if it made more sense story-wise, as... Actually, it does. Sorry, it's a bit of a tangent, but I initially thought, oh, why would he split the parties up to the worlds they came from? After all, he wants the worlds to stay connected. But potentially he's trying to show them that they'll lose their friends if they finish their goal and defeat him. So I give him more props there, I guess. But the fight's just really boring and really long. And again, I probably could have just put my controller down. And I do not care for Zed as an antagonist or a character. Genuinely, I don't know what it is, but Xeno games just seem to have a tendency to have really bad final bosses. I don't know. Don't hurt me. I'm just the messenger. But I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!